Before we begin, can I ask one small favor? If you like the show and the conversations we're sharing, it would mean the world to me if you could subscribe to the show and follow along on whatever platform you're listening to this on. You may not know it, but by simply subscribing, you are helping us in a big way to continue creating and sharing our quiet conversations. Thank you so much. Now, onwards to the show.
The drama triangle is a model developed by a psychiatrist called Stephen Cartman. I am a rescuer. Rescuers become coaches. So some of the research from Gottman suggested that about 2/3 of the conflict cycles of the arguments we find ourselves having with loved ones is repetitive. When two people are at loggerheads, both in persecutor, both unwilling to take a back step, both unwilling to accept any ownership or responsibility, it's just tit for tat. If they keep coming to the party in the same outfit, the same result's always going to happen. So in relation to the drama triangle, I feel the biggest challenge that people face in regards to conflict resolution is that both people need to willingly engage in the process of growth and change.
Hi, I'm Dan Morgan, a transformational life coach.
This week on The Quiet Life, we're diving in to learn how we can change our lives for the better. Often in our upbringings and in our relationships, we all play a role in how we act and interact with others and the world around us. But it doesn't mean that we can't make better change and have personal development to allow us to step into a space that is a space of growth and opportunity. And so I'm speaking to Daniel Morgan, a transformational coach who has worked with clients all around the world, including actors, Olympic athletes, entrepreneurs, and top professionals. I'm excited to share this conversation with you. Now, onwards to the show. So first question, what is your definition of a quiet life? How do you define it?
I would say a quiet life comes about when we willingly engage in the process of untethering the stories that create the noise in our day-to-day life.
So you're a transformational coach, transformational life coach. Let's start there. What is that?
So my role as a transformational coach is to facilitate non-judgmental, neutral spaces where people can explore their values, their strengths, their weaknesses, their belief systems, their behaviors, how they see themselves in relation to other people and in relation to the world at large. So it's essentially developing deeper levels of self-awareness so that then you can create meaningful and positive change.
And how is that important, or how does that help someone specifically?
So it can help in many ways. So my work as a coach, I work across many life domains. So a lot of coaches now niche, whereas I kind of anti-niched in that I feel that there's no way that we can separate personal and professional life. So I work with some people on their relationships. I work with some people on the relationship that they have with their self. So yeah, many different things.
I don't know if you even know the answer to this, but where did the word life coach come from, or how does that come to terms? Just because I feel like it can be quite not a loaded term, but it can be quite an all-encompassing one.
I think it's quite loaded, and it's become a bit of a yucky word with a lot of negative connotation. I prefer the term transformational coach because I think it speaks to a broader concept, and it's quite leading in that it would make people believe that I come as the expert and that they're there to learn from me, whereas coaching is actually, we are equal. I am positive, you are positive. I believe that you are whole and resourceful and have all of the answers. I'm just going to ask you clever questions to tease out the awareness so that you can make the change.
I often find that coaching obviously sits on the same continuum or same scale as self-development. Can you speak to me a little bit about where those two things sit together, or maybe even start with what self-development is as by definition or understanding?
Yeah, so I always describe self-development or self-exploration as like a continuum. So over here on the left, we have therapy, and far over here on the right, we have consultancy and mentorship. And then somewhere in the middle, we have counseling and coaching, and they kind of cross over into this gray space.
I suppose therapy is perhaps a more familiar term, maybe a more common outlet for conversation. Where does that fall into when should someone use a coach versus when should someone go to therapy, or understanding the distinctions really? Because that a scale, the continuum of therapy will be over here and coach sitting somewhere in the middle between here. How does someone listening to this just understand the difference?
Of course. So the best way I describe the differences between therapy and coaching, therapy is predominantly focused on your past, and it's making sense and processing previous experiences and previous traumas. So often if people are finding it really hard to move forward and they haven't examined their past, it could be that there's some things there that are holding them back and limiting their ability to move forward. Whereas coaching tends to be much more present focused and future focused. So where are you now and where do you want to be and how do we get there?
So you find that it's a certain type of person that's attracted to coaching, as in someone who's more forward thinking, someone maybe who's a bit more A type, or someone who has a goal versus someone who goes to therapy that maybe is a little bit more reflective? Or is it the way in which we see these two practices, modalities, is a want versus a need?
To answer the first part, a lot of my clients are actually in therapy alongside coaching.
Right.
So the type of coach that I am, a transformational coach, sits in this kind of middle space, as I said. So I always describe this as two types of coaches. We have the horizontal coach, which is very like A to B. You want to get from here to here. What do you need to do? Okay, I'm going to check in with you next week. Have you done the things? And then there's the vertical part of coaching, which is the limiting beliefs, the self-sabotage, all of the things that get in the way of you, your ability to move from A to B. So I call myself a diagonal coach. So in terms of the type of person it attracts, I feel that people that want to know more about themselves and their history, people that want to get the best from their lives, usually tend to do both. But I feel that it depends where they are presently in their life and what their struggle is.
That's really interesting. How did you find your way into this? Have you had experience yourself with coaching or therapy, or was this just something that developed naturally for you?
So it developed naturally, but I have had experience with both therapy and coaching. I have both a therapist and a coach. But for me, it began with me hiring my first coach when I felt really lost, very, very stuck. What I thought was going to be my life's journey and profession collapsed overnight, essentially. I didn't know where to go or what to do. So amongst other things, I hired a coach to try and help me find clarity, because I didn't feel like I needed to look and explore my past. I needed more clarity about what was next.
But for people who are now listening to this and going, okay, that's interesting, and this potentially could be something for me, it feels like the coaching landscape, especially in the way you're describing, horizontal, vertical, diagonal, there seems like a lot of possibility or option. Where does someone start? How do we distinguish what approach works, where maybe perhaps like therapy, there's lots of options or different perspectives? From a coaching point of view, where does someone look to start even understanding the types of coaches before even finding the right one?
Yeah, I think that the landscape presently is very, very confusing, because a lot of people are calling themselves a coach when they aren't, and it's muddying the water as to what a coach actually is. So as I said earlier, I believe that you have all of the resources available, and I'm just going to help you bring clarity, help you zoom out a little bit. But what I would say is that the majority of decent coaches and therapists will always offer like a chemistry session or a first session for you as the client to understand, is this a good fit? Is this the sort of person that can help me on my journey? Is this the kind of support that I need?
If I was to go back a moment, though, if I was literally opening my computer, going into Google, and I type in coach, it probably will come up with something like a football coach first, or it'll come up with, a coach who will help me with a sport or a music thing. What are the different terms that someone could be Googling or searching for? Transformational coach, you've talked about, but I've heard of things like mindset coaching and lifestyle coaching and life coaching. What are the distinctions that we can be looking for?
It's a very good question. I think that terms like transformational coach or transformative coach is usually going to speak to like a humanistic approach to coaching, which is one that's non-judgmental, one that is empowering of the client. I think that life coach, mindset coach, I think that a lot of people are using these terms essentially just to separate themselves, to create a niche for themselves, and a lot of the work will be the same. A lot of what we explore is the mindset. They've just chosen to use that terminology. So if I was to Google, I would Google life coach, I would Google transformative or transformational coach, if you're looking to develop deeper levels of self-awareness.
That's really helpful. Now, sorry to ask a basic question. Does one get certified in coaching? Do you go to school for coaching? And then does that give you a certain distinction to help with this potential confusion? Like, what is the distinction you get when you train to be a coach?
So this is quite a controversial topic within the sphere of coaching and therapy, in that there is actual no legal requirement for you to get a qualification. However, my standpoint on this is that if you can, you should, because it can be quite deep work and you're entrusted with the support of someone else's life. So yes, there are qualifications that you can do, and they can vary anywhere between 6 months and a year, usually involve a lot of case studies, recorded conversations, and there are a number of different governing bodies that are associated with the coaching world.
And not to put you on the spot, but what would yours be, or what type of training have you done to give context?
Yeah, of course. So my training was with Animas. It was a diploma in transformational coaching, and the course was 9 months, but it ended up being kind of like a year with all of the case studies. And that was accredited by ICF and 2 other bodies that I can't remember. But yeah, you can see that on their website.
So with coaching and your experience with it, what are the biggest shifts? Or actually, what are the biggest challenges that you usually find when you're sitting with people first?
So the first challenge is self-awareness. So a lot of people aren't aware of what the stories are that they're telling themselves, which is getting in the way of them doing the thing that they want to do. But I think following that, it's usually fear. People can have all the self-awareness that they want, but if they aren't willing to take the step out there and make the change, then the change can't take place.
Obviously, anonymously, could you maybe just share maybe a few anecdotes about maybe what that looks like?
Yeah, of course. So I had a client, we'll call her Susie, that came to me, and she was in a pivotal moment of life change in a number of different domains. So she was very, very unhappy in her career. And she'd also been single for about 5 years. So she came to me, she's in her mid-30s, and she was like, I want to be married, I want to have children, and I want to have a job that I love. So I was like, okay, this is a tall order, but we'll see what we can do. And I worked with her for a number of years on the different life domains, focusing on one at a time. So we began with her career. And through the process, she worked with me to gain clarity. She then trained and qualified as a psychotherapist. And then following that, she was like, okay, now I want to work with my fear of getting back into the dating world, because she was a bit put off by all of the dating apps and all of the kind of new ways to meet people. So we engaged with that. And then not too long into the process, she then met who is now her husband, and she's now pregnant with her first kid. So it was an incredible journey to be part of and to support her on.
Where does manifesting fit into this conversation of coaching? These days, more and more, we hear about the idea of manifestation, or the idea of going after maybe what you would like in your life. And this sounds like an example of that. Mm-hmm. Do those things work together, or are they quite different?
I think they partner wonderfully. Yeah, I think that. So one of the exercises I do, you could call it manifestation. I call it future pacing. And the exercise is I pick up my pretend phone and call them on their pretend phone. And I'm pretending that I'm doing a research study for my next book. And I'm asking where they are now 3 years on from our first conversation. And they tell me what has happened over the last 3 years, where they are now, what their life looks like. And I think that really does speak essentially to manifestation. It's like, picture your ideal world, picture your ideal circumstances, what your relationship would look like, what your job would look like. And then they speak as if it's already happened. So they get that embodied feeling of, wow, how does it feel to be here? It feels incredible. And then from there, that's where the kind of coaching process comes in that we reverse engineer. Okay, so if that's 3 years, where would you need to be in a year with all of this? Where would you need to be in 6 months? Where would you need to be in 3 months? What does 1 week look like? So that's where the coaching comes in and joins the manifestation part in making it real, making it tangible, achievable steps.
And what I really like about that, and it's quite, I suppose, an example of, let's say, football coaching or sport coaching or coaching children, is that you're on the sideline because you can't play the game.
100%.
But at the same time, you're doing your best to support, sometimes shouting from the sideline saying, this is what we said we were going to do. And I find that really interesting because it is a really supportive role to be in someone's life. It is something that's really powerful. It sounds like to be in someone's life. When do you find that perhaps coaching's not necessary? What is the timeline of working with a coach?
Very good question. So what my coach originally shared with me is sometimes it's for a reason, so one specific thing. Sometimes it's for a season, for like a collection of different things. And sometimes it's for life. So it depends if the coaching is goal orientated, if there's a specific outcome, or if people just like having someone in their life where they know they're going to have a non-judgmental person that will sit there, that will listen, that will feedback, that will mirror some of the things that are going on in their life. So it really depends on the individual and what it is that they're seeking.
What's the difference between a coach and a mentor?
So a mentor, or sometimes I bracket this with like advisories or consultants, it usually comes from the mindset of I know more, or I've had the experience in this sector, and so I'm going to give you the information that worked for me, and I would like for you to implement it. So they're usually a few steps ahead in the game, whereas with a coach, we don't offer our opinion unless it's asked for. And then it's very much like, okay, I'm going to take my coaching hat off now and share my opinion with all the biases that comes with.
How does that work for your ego in this? Obviously, as a coach, there's a lot of yourself that you're putting into the support of others, but it must feel good when things work out.
For sure.
How do you work with that interplay of yourself into someone else's life?
It's always about the client, and I think it's constantly remembering that that's the case. Of course, it's like what you call like an ego stroke. It does feel wonderful when the client achieves the thing that they said they would, but that celebration then is for them. It's not for me. Because as you said earlier, whilst I can ask questions that shine a light on what they may need to do, I can't do anything for them. So the wins are all the clients. I just get to share in that celebration.
Do you find that people come to you when they're at their lowest, at their highest, or when they're at the start of something that they want to reach or achieve?
I would say predominantly people come to me when they're lost, when they're confused, so nearer the lower end of the spectrum, or they're just a bit meh, in the middle somewhere. A lot of people don't affiliate or associate coaching when they're at their best. It's kind of like, why would I need a coach now? And I always remind my clients of this. Sometimes they come into a conversation, they say, Dan, I don't know what to talk to you about today because nothing's going wrong. And I said, well, coaching's not always about fixing. Coaching can be about expanding, building upon. So most clients come to me in the middle and the bottom end, but I think it's always eye-opening for them of when they come to me and they've had big wins. And then I ask the question, so what's next? How do we build on this?
That's really interesting. So in some of my pre-research and some of the way I was preparing for this, and we talked about this a little bit in the preparation. What is the drama triangle?
So the drama triangle is firstly the gift that keeps on giving in regards to understanding conflict. But it was a model that was created and popularized by Dr. Stephen Cartman. So he's a psychologist or psychiatrist even. And it was developed in the 60s, and it speaks to the three predominant roles that people will tend to play when they're in conflict or in an argument. So that's the victim, the persecutor, and the rescuer.
And now, is that an ingrained quality, as in you are that person all the time? Or is it something that shifts? How does that interact with day-to-day life?
Yeah, so it can shift, and it can shift within the space of 5 minutes, depending on how the person sat opposite you responds. I wouldn't say that it's ingrained, but there are certain things that kind of influence the role that we might take. So there's another theory called transactional analysis that kind of interweaves wonderfully with this. And it speaks about different ego states and different life positions. So say, for instance, I see myself as superior and I see you as inferior. It's going to affect how I show up, how I communicate, and how I behave.
So in that instance, you would be what?
In that instance, I could be a number of them, but let's say I'd probably be the persecutor. So I'd be judging, I'd be criticizing, I'd be pointing the finger.
What are you?
So interestingly, I am a rescuer. There's another model called the empowerment dynamic triangle, which is kind of shifting these behaviors. So rescuers become coaches. So it's interesting now as a recovering rescuer that I now have the profession as a coach.
Hi friends, I hope you're enjoying listening to the show. One of the ways that we can keep this pod going in the best possible way is by the help of some of our amazing partners and friends. So if you can give me just a few moments to listen into these ads and messages, it would be so appreciated. Exhale is a choice to take control of your mind and mental health. Welcome to the Just Breathe course for breathwork and meditation, our 6-week program to help you breathe better, reduce stress, and regulate the nervous system. Hi, I'm Michael James Wong, meditation and breathwork teacher and founder of Just Breathe. And my life's work is dedicated to helping as many people as possible quiet the mind using the power of breathwork and meditation. And that's why I created Exhale. This course brings together my 20 years of experience studying, sharing, and teaching these practices in the real world. Inside the course, you'll gain instant on-demand access to over 100 plus videos, lectures, technique tutorials, and guided breathwork and meditation practices dedicated to helping you create a personal and powerful ability to respond to any and all of life's big and small stressful moments. In this course, you'll learn my unique perspective and agnostic approach to help quiet the mind and regulate the nervous system. Each week during the course, you'll be invited to join our live Zoom sessions where I'll share and discuss with you both the science and the wisdom of these quiet practices. And even more, I'll be joined by some of the world's most well-respected psychologists and neuroscientists to help us understand even further. We'll talk about the nuances of stress, the science of stimulation and how we regulate the nervous system, and how to rewire your brain for the better. And what I love most about this course is you're not just joining me, you're joining a community of like-minded people all around the world who are dedicated to learning more, building their personal practice, and understanding how to use breathwork and meditation to change our lives for the better every single day. As a reminder, you'll get on-demand and lifetime access to the course material. You'll have access to 100 plus video lectures, techniques, and practices. And you'll have 6 weeks of live talks and lectures and learnings with me on breathwork and meditation. You'll have 3 amazing talks with some of the world's most well-respected psychologists and neuroscientists, and you'll become part of our global Just Breathe community. So join us on the journey as we take control of our mind and mental health. Welcome to Exhale. The course is now open. See you on the inside. So a rescuer being essentially the white knight, the person who is here to save the day.
Correct, exactly.
Do you think that is because of how you were raised? Is it based on childhood traumas? Is it a representation of your nurture?
Nurture certainly influences it. So the role that I played within my family was often the mediator. So in doing so, I often put my own stuff to the back of my head and focused on being who I needed to be to resolve the situation at hand and bring harmony back to the household. So yeah, I think there's a lot to do with the circumstances that you grow up around, the people that you grow up around and the roles that they play, and the role that you feel you need to take on in order to fit into the dynamic.
If you don't mind sharing, and you can obviously say no, but when you say mediator in your own upbringing, what does that mean?
So yeah, I'm happy to share. I have a wonderful relationship with my family. So it's very, very common as well. During essentially puberty and teenage years, my sister had a lot of teenage angst, and that caused a lot of conflict between my mum and her. So my dad, working man, would come home from work and I'd answer the door and it'd kind of be this question of, is it thumbs up or is it thumbs down? Have they had an argument? And obviously he was at work and I might come home, or we both come home from school, and let's say they argue. I then felt like I needed to try and calm that situation down, resolve that situation. So I used to kind of step in and try and rescue the situation and help them try and see eye to eye.
So does that mean you then suppressed a lot of your own frustrations within the household, or any challenges you faced were kind of just not disregarded, but maybe deprioritized?
Yeah, I think it was down to me suppressing my own, let's call it stuff, because I was prioritizing trying to resolve the arguments that I was witnessing.
So if that, let's say, breeds the rescuer, what's an example of what a situation would be that would breed the victim?
An example could be that, let's say a couple that are living together, and one person in the relationship says, I would love for you to take the bins out. I'm just going to pop out and run some errands. So off they go. They come back and the bins haven't been taken out. And so that person that made the request gets very, very angry, and they take on the role of the persecutor. I can't believe you haven't taken the bins out. They get very, very irate. They're pointing the finger, they're judging. And then that might make someone then feel inadequate. They might feel blamed and judged. And then they might assume the role then of the victim. Well, I always try my best, but nothing's ever good enough. So one will trigger the other.
Is there validity in that, or is that more of a crutch in the moment? So if we role play this for a moment, if I'm the victim and you say, Michael, why didn't you take the bins out? I was gone for 2 hours. You're just sitting there scrolling on your phone. Why are the bins not out? And I say, well, I'm quite exhausted. I've had a really busy week. I've got a deadline, I'm writing this email, I'm going to, but I haven't yet. Is that me being the victim?
So that's kind of like on the fence a little bit, because in some regards, you're creating justification for why you haven't, and also demonstrating the fact that you will, and you're explaining the circumstances. So the difference between that and a victim is a victim would absolve all responsibility, and they would blame other people and outside circumstances predominantly for why they can't do it, but they won't take any ownership at all.
So in that instance, what would my response be?
Can't you just take the bins out? I'm a lot more busy than you. Please save me, essentially.
Right. But if in this situation, you're the persecutor, you're going to keep coming at me.
Yeah, because what would make the persecutor more angry is the fact that the other person is taking no responsibility or ownership.
And so do you find that in, let's say, relationships or in family dynamics, you get locked into a role?
I think that people have predominant roles that they play, and this is where it can get really challenging, is that if they keep coming to the party in the same outfit, the same result's always going to happen. So less so locked in, and what can happen as well is you can bounce around the triangle. So for instance, I'll use myself as an example. Predominantly I will rescue, but I'll rescue over and over and over, and then eventually I'll get frustrated that nothing's changing and it's my own doing because I'm enabling. So then I might victimize myself, like, oh, my life's hard as well. And then when that doesn't work, then I'll persecute.
But is it like rock, paper, scissors, where rock beats scissors, scissors beats paper, and paper beats rock, where you essentially slide around the scale, always in your own mind beating something else? Yeah, so
what will happen is you bounce around these different roles as you never escape the drama triangle. You're essentially stuck within it. So then there's an alternative model proposed by David Emerald, who's a coach, where there's 3 different roles that are more empowering, that then enable you to break these cycles of conflict, essentially. And those roles are the creator, the challenger, and the coach. So the victim becomes the creator.
What do you mean by creator?
So to define the creator role, that is someone that takes ownership and responsibility for their role and their circumstances. And then they're proactive and creative in solving the problems for themselves. And then onto the... Yeah.
So does that mean that they would find the reason to take the bins out?
Exactly. Because if they can see that their behavior is perpetuating a cycle of conflict, they would also own the fact that despite being very busy, the bin probably only takes about 30 seconds to take out the door and put in the bin. So like, well, it's probably easier and more beneficial for me to do this. And then maybe we can create a rota, this is where the creative part comes in, of I have some chores and you have some chores, and then I won't forget to do them.
So it's really interesting you say this and timely, because literally last night in my own house, we're going to bed, and my wife had already gone up to bed. I was going upstairs. I was halfway up, and then I get a message. Sometimes we message just because the kids are asleep. And it's, hey, the sheets are in the dryer. And so I go, my default is, oh, but I'm about to go brush my teeth, go to the bathroom, awkward pause. So is that me victimizing myself in that moment?
Well, it depends what your outlook is.
I suppose, if I'm honest, it's me trying to not have to walk all the way back downstairs to get the sheets out of the dryer, knowing all well I'm going to have to go all the way upstairs, make the bed before I can then go to the bathroom, fundamentally.
Yeah. So it could be like, this is where it's not like hard or fast. So it could be like subtle victimhood, hoping that maybe then your partner will pick up the slack and do it on your behalf so that your life's a little easier, so that it enables you not to take on that responsibility, right?
Yeah, and I think probably with that first element of awareness, it's noticing where we are when the situation arises. And it's like the natural thing of, in hindsight, things are very clear. But when you look at that sense of victim, persecutor, rescuer, even if someone has a natural disposition or a lean towards one, I find that sometimes you can almost become attached to that in identity, so that even in, let's say, a social dynamic or a place where it's unfamiliar, you take that role. Yeah. Do you find that happens? Do you become the rescuer in all situations? Are you the person going, I'll go get the cat from the tree, or don't worry, guys, I know you left your watch at the bar, I'll run back?
Yeah, it's certainly a predominant tendency that in the majority of situations where it involves other people, I will tend to step into the rescuer role to make the social circumstances more comfortable.
But it sounds like, to me at least, that the rescuer is almost the good one and the other ones are the two bad ones.
This is where it's kind of confusing because rescuers are enablers. So it's not necessarily a good thing. It's just fronts as a good thing, but often it's at the expense. So I'll use myself as example. It's at the expense of me. Usually I'm suppressing my own wants and needs. And then that often builds resentment and frustration, which then might lead to me being passive aggressive, or it might lead me then to become a bit of a persecutor, pointing the finger myself. So they're no better than each other. It's just they might present better in certain situations.
So is rescuer a people pleaser?
You could interchange the terminology, I would say, yeah.
And so what you just said, as far as because of that rescuing tendency, it leads you towards frustration, passive aggressiveness. Is that always the case? Do some people just like to be a rescuer?
So this is where kind of you could speak about like ego strokes is dependent on a life position. So let's say I'm rescuing from a place of feeling superior. I might enjoy doing that because it makes me feel like I'm demonstrating value, that I have worth, that I'm more capable or better than the person I'm saving.
But fundamentally, that ego stroke, while maybe the world doesn't see it, the world sees when someone acts like a victim. The world sees when someone acts like a persecutor and is judging this and saying that's wrong or you're stupid or this isn't right. So does that mean that victims and persecutors have more growth that needs to happen?
No, I wouldn't say it's more growth. And also, sometimes it can be really subtle. You might be persecuting, like, for instance, judging others inside your head, but not saying anything out loud, right? Or you spoke about the example of like, oh, well, I don't want to take the sheets out, so maybe I'll, not read the message. Is, again, that's not like a dramatic, woe is me, my life's so hard. It's just this internal dialogue, if you will, about a certain situation. So I don't think that there's any more growth. I think actually, because you sometimes get the ego stroke from rescuing, it's really hard to let go of staying in that role, because sometimes you do get this positive feedback loop created. It's like, oh, this feels good because I did a good thing.
Is there any positive feedback, though, from being a victim or being a persecutor?
So for a victim, you never have to take ownership and people always take care of you and do everything.
You never have to take the bins out.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And then for a persecutor, you feel domineering, you feel in charge, you feel superior. So it gives you this sense of importance and entitlement all the time. And usually because of your demeanor, people will run around and do things for you because they're frightened or they, feel like they're treading on eggshells, essentially. So the benefit from that is you get a lot of yes people surrounding you.
So in that instance, are there certain types of jobs or roles in society that would attract those type of people or that would create those type of people?
Case and point of like the rescuer has become the coach. But I've learned obviously how to use my tendency in a non-biased and supportive way, but very much so. I think that it's certainly influenced me. It's not an exact science, but I'd imagine maybe that some people that are persecutors find themselves in positions of authority, maybe a CEO or the head of a leadership team, but then potentially maybe cracks would start to show when people don't respond so well to their style.
What does a victim become?
Victims, I think, could become anything. It's just how you then show up to the role that you play.
Oftentimes on this show, we talk about the perspective or the perception that we have with the world around us. From a standpoint of a victim, is there an element of manipulation within that? As in being the victim because I don't want to take the bins out, or playing the victim because I know someone will take the bins out?
I think so. But based off of what you just shared, I think that certainly an intelligent person would know that they can play on someone else's heartstrings to get a particular outcome. I think it really would come down to the level of self-awareness that someone has, whether they're aware of the fact that that's their tendency, and so they're going to see how much they can eke out, or if they're completely unaware, in which case it's kind of more running on autopilot.
Why do you think, and I know this is a reflection of my life, and it sounds like it's a reflection of yours, why do these dynamics play out so much more in relationships or family dynamics as opposed to with strangers or maybe at the office?
I think that proximity plays a massive part. Obviously, if you're spending a lot of time with someone, you're going to see their true colors. I think as well in romantic relationships, tend to revisit the same conflict cycles over and over again. And then in doing so, these roles are just going to emerge over and over. So there's some research from Gottman that kind of suggested that 2/3 of the conflicts or arguments that we find ourselves in are repetitive. So obviously with family members, you've known them for years and years and years. With your partner, depending on how long you've been with them, you've known them for years and years and years. So the same stuff constantly resurfaces until it's dealt with.
And they know how to push your buttons.
100%.
Which means that I suppose that in all of those closer dynamics, the persecutor will come out. Because you know, or at least I know, that if I want to rile up my brother, my dad, you just got to do that one thing.
Yeah. Or, for instance, your partner or brother or dad might get very angry, or their buttons might be pushed if you play the victim, if you're not taking any responsibility. So it really depends. Yeah, once you know what someone's button is, you can certainly push it.
So why is it called, what is drama then? What is drama? In the drama triangle, understandably, the triangle is the triangle, but how are we defining drama?
I would say drama could be defined as conflict, disagreements, and dysfunction. So non-healthy discussion, non-healthy interactions.
And who defines it as unhealthy? Because for me, if I think this is a normal behavior, as in me not taking out the bins, normal behavior, you rescuing me with the bins, taking out the bins, is that dramatic, or is that just the way our relationship's been cultivated?
I think the example of the bins is representative usually of layers of where the same behavior will show up. And I think what happens is sooner or later one person gets tired of the dynamic. And so they broach the subject, this can't go on forever, otherwise separation, otherwise divorce. And usually at that junction point, awareness has been established at least a little for then both parties to engage in the process of trying to understand why they keep repeating the same cycles over and over again.
So we talk about a lot on this podcast, what is the work? What is the work that is to be done or needs to be done? And when I speak to a lot of psychotherapists or psychologists, there's the three aspects of focus, right? There's awareness, there's experience or behavior change, and there's integration. For this, in these kind of dynamics, obviously it's usually a little bit more interactive because it's probably relationship-based oftentimes, because you can't have a victim without a persecutor, or maybe you can. But what is the work here to either break the cycle, change the cycle, or evolve from it?
I think that the work is very, very similar. I think that it requires both individuals to develop their own self-awareness about the role that they play and how that might be influencing the role that in a romantic situation, let's say, that their partner plays. Second to that, then it's about having the awareness about what will trigger or what will push the buttons of your partner so that you can start to de-escalate the situation as it presents. So I think definitely it begins with the awareness on an individual level, and then seeing it at play. That's the really, really tricky part, is it's just a lot of practice over and over again. You just get quicker and quicker at catching the dynamic earlier and earlier on, so that it doesn't escalate to something that's explosive that then it's harder to repair.
So for people listening to the show, thinking, this is interesting, and maybe I'm becoming a little bit more self-aware that this might be dynamics that play out in my house or my family, but the other side or the other person or people aren't on a journey of self-awareness.
That, I would say, is one of the hardest problems and challenges faced within the world of self-development or relationship dynamics, is you have to have two willing participants to engage in the process of change and growth. So what would I say to those people? You can lead a horse to water, is like a very, very common phrase, right? Is at some point, every individual that's in circumstances that makes them unhappy is going to have to be very honest and very transparent about their feelings. To some degree, not as an ultimatum, but the consequences that potentially exist if change doesn't take place. And then it's up to the other person to take ownership and responsibility and decide if they want to continue the journey with their person, or if that's when they go on their separate paths.
Are there small steps that can be done in that process? So let's take this example where it's no longer you and I talking about bins. It's me talking to my father about bins. Obviously, he's set in his ways. He's of an older generation. He's from a certain cultural background that says the bins are taken out by the children. Let's just keep that as a hard line, for example. And that's relatively true in my upbringing. It was The children do a certain amount of chores or a certain amount of responsibilities for the house because that's essentially the way in which rent is paid, or that is the responsibility of being of a certain, I suppose, status, for lack of a better term, in the family dynamic. Mm-hmm. So for me, going into teenage years, and this is, again, relatively true, I'd be of the mindset of, I got other things to do. I didn't fill the bins. I got an older brother and a younger sister. There's 5 people in the house. Why am I doing the bins, as my assigned chore? And in saying that, the opposition would never be, okay, well, let's talk about this and let's figure out the best way to be more self-aware and shift the relationship where you aren't becoming, or I'm not becoming more and more of a victim and my father's not becoming more and more of a persecutor. And I'm happy to use myself as an example. What would be, if this was a real world example now in my life as an adult, and I was still living at home and the bins were still being demanded of me, are there small steps I can do to maybe move towards that otherwise, instead of leading towards ultimatum?
Yeah, I think that the difficult thing, you mentioned this, of there's context to be considered and there's environment to be considered. So under your parents' household, there already exists a hierarchy, if you will, and that's quite hard to combat. So within that position, it's usually parents are superior and children are inferior. Parents know more, do as you're told.
They provide, they pay for everything.
Yeah, so then it's a question of, should there be more ownership on your part in that instance as a contribution to the larger family dynamic? And I think it really depends, as always, of your father's approach to asking you to do that. He may not be doing that from the position of a persecutor. He may be doing that from outside of the triangle, just asking you compassionately and politely to engage as part of the family dynamic. There is no right or wrong, so to speak, in this situation. What is a step you could take? I think it would be zooming out to have the awareness of, is my dad actually being a persecutor here? Or am I just being a victim?
Well, taking it back to your example that you said a few minutes ago, when you said in your household growing up that you were the rescuer, so you were a mediator. And similar in my house as well, growing up, if this dynamic played out, it would almost become a stalemate because my mom would come in and say, I'll just take the bins out. Mm-hmm. So therefore, the dynamic between myself and my father, or your sister and your mother, there's no resolution.
To use my situation as an example, because I kept playing that role, I enabled them both to expect that I would come in and do the fixing. But the emotionally challenging part would be for me to step back and for them to recognize and for me to own the fact that it's not my argument to solve.
To watch it burn.
Exactly, or not to watch, to walk off, to take myself elsewhere. And for them to take ownership and responsibility in being able to solve that argument or disagreement themselves.
Is one aspect of the work for the rescuer to not rescue.
100%. Yeah, so rather than being a rescuer, they step into the role of coach, which is to support people in the journey of developing self-reliance and autonomy.
And then the work of the persecutor is to be okay with things not going their way?
Yeah, to essentially be less critical, to be less judgmental, and to accept more ownership for the part that they're playing in the dynamic. They're being the aggressor.
And how does one do that?
How does one stop being the aggressor, or how does one bring the awareness to it?
Because I find that a lot of times, if people are an aggressor or they hold expectations for others, they don't actually think they are. They almost just think this is the way it should be. I'm not being angry at you. You deserve this. Or this is just the tone I would speak at because I'm feeling frustrated.
So often what will happen in the presence of a persecutor is someone will either assume the role of the victim and in doing so enable the persecutor to continue their behavior, or a rescuer might swoop in to save a victim, do what the persecutor is asking the victim to do, so they stop being mean to the victim. So in order to break the cycle, essentially the victim or the rescuer need to stop or to step out of their role and place down a boundary so that the persecutor becomes more aware of the fact that they won't always get their way, that they can't always bully people or push people around, They can't constantly position themselves as superior or domineering over other people.
What if there's two persecutors face to face?
War, in short. But you're usually quite stubborn, aggressive arguments. They're usually the fireworks. When two people are at loggerheads, both in persecutor, both unwilling to take a back step, both unwilling to accept any ownership or responsibility, it's just tit for tat.
So in relationship dynamics, do you find that we tend to gravitate to other people who have a different tendency? So if you're the rescuer and you love to save the cats from the trees, would you attract someone who loves to save the cats or likes to stand there while you save their cat?
I think it's a good chance that you will usually attract the opposite dynamic, because it allows you to continue playing the role that you're familiar with. And I think this is often what happens in relationships, is a lot of these problems don't come out until 4 or 5 years in, when they're both doing some growth, they're both seeing the shape of their relationship change, and then they realize, well, I don't want to be the rescuer forever, or I don't want to be persecuted by someone for the rest of my life. And so it's only at that point when they realize, I'm actually playing a role that is enabling my partner to play their role, and we need to do something about this.
So when all is said and done, and we start to become a little bit more aware of these roles, and am I right in saying there's no other roles? These are the roles.
So in relation to the drama triangle, these are the 3 roles, and they have different flavors, different colors, so to speak. More insidious, less insidious, more subtle, more overt. But yeah, these are the 3 roles.
Is it an easy thing to decipher in yourself? Is there a little test for it, or is it just an honest truth you have to look at yourself at?
In my work with clients, I will often draw a triangle on a whiteboard, and I'll just get them to bring up a recent conflict, and we write on the triangle where it was they think they were and where it was they think the other person was. And then we talk through the story of that conflict and see if they move around. And usually after doing this with a number of different disagreements or arguments with different people, it starts to become quite obvious the role that they tend to play. For the listener, what they could do is literally what I just said: draw a triangle on a piece of paper, write down each of the roles at one of the points of the triangle, and just think about a trivial recent disagreement that you had, and think about, well, based off of what I know about these roles, where do I sit on the triangle, and where did the other person sit? And you can just start to see then how the dynamic would then play out from that point. And then the more awareness that you develop on reflection, you'll then start to be able to predict, likely, if someone behaves like this, then I'm probably going to instinctively respond like this.
In your example of the drama triangle with the bins, what is the right answer?
I think the right answer is when you can both come to an agreement on a dynamic that doesn't continue to perpetuate the cycle of conflict that you're experiencing. So I don't think there's necessarily a right answer. I gave the example of the bin rotor. If both parties aren't happy with taking the bins out, then it needs to be a compromise. So it might be I take the bins out on Monday and my partner takes the bins out on Tuesday, and we alternate days. So it's about finding a solution that feels okay and that feels acceptable for both parties.
For people listening, what's the best way for them to find out more, to get in touch, or to find resources that can support the conversation?
So the best way that people can get in contact with me is via my website. So that's danmorgancoach.com, and there's a contact form on there, or equally just DMing me on Instagram, which is danmorgancoach.
Dan, thank you so much for joining us for the show. It's great to have you here, and thanks for sharing.
It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you.